Eleanor Davies awoke to the sound of birdsong and the soft rustling of leaves outside a window she didn't recognize. Her head throbbed. She sat up quickly, only to find herself dressed in an elaborate white wedding gown. Lace sleeves clung to her arms, and a veil lay crumpled at the foot of the bed. But this wasn't her bedroom. The walls were timbered and old, the furniture rustic and unfamiliar. A pale morning light seeped through the curtains, casting long shadows on the wooden floorboards. She turned her head toward the nightstand where an empty glass and a crumpled note sat. "Don't go back. Not yet." No signature. No explanation. Just 5 chilling words. Eleanor stood up shakily, her bare feet cold on the wooden floor. Panic tightened around her chest. Today was supposed to be her wedding day. But nothing about this place made sense. She crossed the room and opened the door, stepping into a narrow hallway of an unfamiliar country cottage. "Hello?" she called out, her voice echoing. No response. She made her way downstairs, trying not to trip on the hem of her dress. The sitting room was quiet. A fire had been lit recently, its embers still glowing. A jacket was thrown carelessly over a chair. Someone else had been here. She found a phone on a small table near the window, but the battery was dead. No charger. No clue. The only thing she knew was that she had to leave. She couldn't stay in this house any longer. She opened the front door, and the cold Cotswold air hit her face. The landscape outside was open and green, dotted with sheep and winding stone fences. A narrow lane led toward a small village in the distance. She started walking, her wedding gown dragging through the dewy grass. Halfway down the lane, she heard footsteps behind her. "Eleanor," a male voice said firmly. She turned around to see a man in a long dark coat. He looked to be in his late 30s, sharp-featured, with tired eyes that had clearly missed sleep. "Who are you?" she asked, backing away. "I'm Arthur. You need to come with me. They're expecting someone else at that altar today, not you." The wind picked up, swirling her veil around her ankles. Eleanor stared at him, heart pounding. "What do you mean? I'm the bride." "It's my wedding." Arthur shook his head slowly. "Not anymore." Eleanor stared at Arthur, her breath fogging in the morning chill. The man before her looked serious, too serious for someone who just claimed her wedding was a lie. His coat was damp at the shoulders, and there was mud on his boots. He had clearly been searching for her. "I'm not going anywhere until you explain," she said, voice trembling. Arthur glanced back toward the cottage. "Not here. Come. There's a place in the village we can talk. You're not safe out in the open." Still stunned, Eleanor allowed him to walk beside her down the lane. Her hands trembled, not from cold, but confusion. The dress felt heavier with every step, as if her very identity was weighing her down. What had happened between the moment she last remembered, having champagne with her bridesmaids, and waking up in that strange house? They passed through a stone gate into a quiet village nestled among rolling hills. It looked like a postcard of rural England, narrow lanes, rose-covered cottages, and an old church steeple visible above the trees. A few villagers gave them odd looks, their eyes lingering on her gown, but no one said a word. Arthur led her into a small tea room at the corner of the high street. The scent of fresh bread and tea leaves was comforting, but Eleanor couldn't focus. A waitress approached, but Arthur shook his head. "Just a moment," he murmured. They took a seat in the back, far from the windows. "Start talking," Eleanor demanded. "Now." Arthur hesitated, then reached into the inner pocket of his coat. He laid out a folded envelope and a photo, old, black and white. In it, a woman with Eleanor's exact face stood beside a man in a military uniform. "That's your mother," he said quietly. "But not the one who raised you." Eleanor blinked. "Excuse me. You were adopted. It was covered up. The family you grew up with, your parents, they were paid to take you in. And the Pembrokes knew it. They've been watching you for years." Eleanor felt the world spin. She gripped the table for balance. "This is insane." "No. It's dangerous. The Pembrokes are after the inheritance your birth family left behind. Land, investments, and a title. A title that passes to a daughter. To you." Her laugh was sharp and panicked. "You expect me to believe I'm some sort of heiress?" "I expect you to believe that the man you were meant to marry today, Thomas Pembroke, was using you. You were never meant to wake up in that house. He wanted to marry you, claim your name, and disappear with the rights. Eleanor shook her head. Then why did you help me? Because I worked for your real family. Before they died. He pulled out another document. An old birth certificate. The name beside mother was Margaret Wyndham. The name beside child was Eleanor Wyndham. She stared at it in disbelief. I don't remember anything else about my life before I was 5. You weren't supposed to. The Pembrokes erased every trace of it they could find. A heavy silence fell. Her thoughts raced, her breath shallow. Eleanor was still in her wedding dress, still with no idea who she really was. And now, she wasn't even sure what her wedding had been for. Then Arthur leaned in. And there's something else. You weren't the only bride scheduled today. Someone else is wearing your face. The real ceremony, what everyone thinks is your wedding. It's happening right now. With someone pretending to be you. The name Eleanor Wyndham echoed in her head like a bell that refused to stop ringing. Eleanor sat motionless in the tea room, fingers wrapped tightly around a cup of untouched tea. Across from her, Arthur watched her with a mix of sympathy and urgency. He was holding something else now, a small envelope sealed with wax, marked with an unfamiliar crest. Before your mother died, he said quietly, she left instructions. If anything happened to her or your father, this letter was to be delivered when you turned 25. But the Pembrokes intercepted it. He slid the envelope across the table. Eleanor stared at it. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten note, ink faded but careful. My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, then the world has already tried to take from you what is rightfully yours. You are not only my daughter. You are the heir to a legacy others would kill to possess. Trust no one who tries to silence your past. Find the woman in white. She remembers everything. Love always, Mama. The room tilted for a moment as Eleanor reread the letter, eyes locking on the last line. The woman in white. She turned to Arthur. Who is she? Arthur looked tense. We don't know. But your mother spoke of her often, her nursemaid they say, or perhaps someone from the Wyndham estate. Someone who vanished when you did. Eleanor pushed her chair back abruptly. Then that's where I'm going. The Wyndham estate. You can't go alone. Then come with me. But I need answers. Arthur stood slowly. We'll need to be careful. If Thomas realizes you're alive and on the move, then he'll panic, Eleanor finished. Good. By evening, they reached the outskirts of the Wyndham estate, now overgrown and forgotten, hidden behind tall hedges and rusted gates. The place looked abandoned, but Eleanor felt something stir in her chest, a memory she couldn't touch, but recognized like a distant melody. She stepped through the gate. Weeds brushed her gown, birds scattered from the eaves, and the silence pressed in like a thick fog. The house loomed in the dusk, its windows dark, the front door slightly ajar. Eleanor approached it carefully. Inside, dust motes danced in the weak light. The air smelled of damp wood and forgotten time. But something was wrong. A whisper. Just behind her. She spun. No one. Then the floor creaked on the landing above. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. I saw her, Arthur murmured, stepping beside her. Just now by the stairs. A woman in white. They moved slowly up the staircase. Each step groaned beneath their weight. At the top, a corridor stretched ahead, lined with portraits, their eyes seeming to follow her. At the end of the hall stood a woman, tall, cloaked in a white shawl, silver hair pinned in a low bun. Her back was to them. Eleanor's voice cracked. Are you the one who knew my mother? The woman didn't turn. But she spoke. So the child has returned. And they still think they can bury the truth. The woman in white turned slowly, and Eleanor gasped. Her eyes were pale gray like fog on the moors, and though her face was lined with time, there was a quiet strength in her presence, a haunting familiarity Eleanor couldn't explain. I watched you take your first breath, she said gently. You screamed so loud. Your mother laughed through her tears. I was her handmaid. I was yours too once. Eleanor's chest tightened. Why did you disappear? The woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Arlo, led them into what once was the drawing room. It was dark, save for the flickering light from a cracked lantern she carried. Dusty portraits hung askew on the walls, their subjects forgotten, faces faded. I didn't disappear, Mrs. Arlo said quietly. I was hidden. After the fire. Eleanor's eyes snapped up. Fire. The night your parents died. It wasn't an accident. The fire was set to erase everything. Records, truths, bloodlines. You were meant to die in that fire too. But your mother gave you to me. We escaped through the east orchard. She stayed behind. Eleanor sank into an old armchair, the upholstery rough beneath her hands. All these years, she whispered. They let me believe I was a Pembroke. They lied to me. Arthur, who had remained silent, finally spoke. They didn't just lie. They stole everything. Mrs. Arlo nodded solemnly. Thomas Pembroke's father was the solicitor responsible for the Wyndham estate after the fire. He declared it ownerless, and with your memory lost from trauma, they raised you under a false name. It was the perfect theft. A storm had begun outside, thunder rolling low like a growl across the moors. Eleanor's mind reeled. Pieces were falling into place. Her recurring dreams of fire, the nightmares of choking smoke. They weren't just dreams. They were memories. Mrs. Arlo reached into her shawl and drew out a pendant. A small locket, scorched at the edges. Your mother gave me this. Inside is a miniature of her and your father. I've kept it safe. With trembling fingers, Eleanor opened the locket. The faces stared back. Her mother with the same eyes, her father noble and kind. A soft cry escaped her lips. I need to reclaim what they took, she said quietly. Not just for me but for them. Arthur stepped forward. We'll start with your inheritance. There are documents still hidden in the Wyndham archives. Deeds. Letters. If we can recover them, it proves your identity. But you must be careful, Mrs. Arlo warned. Thomas has power. He owns the courts, the constables, the whispers in every tavern. He will not let go without a fight. I don't intend to ask, Eleanor said, eyes fierce. The plan formed quickly. They would travel to London under false names, seek out a lawyer still loyal to the Wyndhams, and begin the process of restoring her name. But they knew it would not be simple. Not when Thomas Pembroke had built his empire on a stolen legacy. And as they departed the crumbling manor, a shadow moved behind a window, unseen. They were not alone. London was nothing like Eleanor remembered. It buzzed with a different kind of energy now. Cynical, watchful. Every step echoed on the wet cobblestones, every glance from a passerby seemed loaded with suspicion. Even the air tasted different, tainted with soot and secrets. Arthur led her through narrow alleys behind the theatre districts, down to the law chambers of Lincoln's Inn. They wore borrowed coats, hats pulled low. Eleanor's heart pounded with every knock of her boots. The office they entered was small but precise. Oak shelves crammed with parchment, ledgers, and leather-bound books. Behind the desk sat a man with a hawk-like nose and wary eyes. You shouldn't be here, he said before they even spoke. Mr. Harrow, Arthur said. You were loyal to Lord Wyndham once. We need your help. The man glanced at Eleanor. His expression tightened. You're her. Eleanor nodded. I'm Eleanor. Wyndham. Mr. Harrow stood. If that's true, you've no idea how dangerous it is just saying your name. He turned the sign on his door to closed, pulled the blinds, and lit a second lantern. I was the one who drew the original Wyndham will. Your father named you sole heir, with protections in place should anything happen. But when the fire occurred, and there was no body, Pembroke Sr. took the estate under emergency guardianship. Was there a copy of the will? Eleanor asked. There was. Harrow hesitated. I kept one. It's hidden. But if I hand it over, Thomas Pembroke will come after us all. We're already being followed, Arthur muttered. We saw a man watching us from Fleet Street. Mr. Harrow's face paled. Then we must act now. He retrieved a box from behind a false panel in the wall. Inside was a bundle of documents sealed in wax, the Wyndham crest still intact. This proves everything, he said. But documents alone won't win against Pembroke. He'll claim forgery, raise questions, delay in court for years. Eleanor looked to Arthur. We need a public blow. One that can't be covered up. Arthur gave a thin smile. There is a gala at the Pembroke estate next week. Press, dignitaries, the lot. If we reveal the truth then, he'll try to silence you before you get the chance, Harrow cut in. And his reach is long. I don't care, Eleanor said. I've been silent my whole life. Not anymore. As they stepped back into the foggy London night, Eleanor felt a strange steadiness settle over her. Her name had been buried in ash, erased from ledgers, lost in flames. But now, she was carving it back into stone. From a rooftop across the street, a shadow watched them vanish into the mist. He spoke into a device tucked behind his collar. They've found the will. Tell Pembroke. She's not running anymore. The Pembroke estate glittered like a crown beneath the evening sky. Its sprawling gardens, manicured within an inch of their lives, brimmed with lords, ladies, and London's most vicious socialites, all dressed in velvet and diamonds. Lanterns floated above like stars, music spilled from the strings of a string quartet, and every smile was as sharp as a blade. Eleanor stepped through the marble archway, arm in arm with Arthur, her gown a deep midnight blue that rippled like shadow with each step. A delicate mask covered her face, silver lace with the Wyndham crest etched subtly at the edge. It was bold. It was dangerous. Arthur whispered. Are you certain about this? Eleanor nodded. He took everything. Tonight I take it back. Inside, the ballroom shimmered with opulence. Gold moldings, chandeliers, and mirrors so pristine they reflected more lies than truth. At the head of it all stood Thomas Pembroke, his smile wide and wolfish as he entertained foreign dignitaries. He didn't see her at first. But when his eyes found her across the room, something flickered. Confusion. Recognition. And then, panic. She watched it bloom beneath his mask like a slow-growing bruise. As Arthur slipped away to join Mr. Harrow and ready the documents, Eleanor moved with purpose through the crowd. Whispers followed her like perfume. Who is she? That mask, surely not. She looks like, no, it can't be. Just as the quartet ended a waltz, Pembroke clapped his hands and called for attention. Friends. Allies. Tonight, we celebrate the strength of legacy. He raised his glass. To old blood and new power. Eleanor stepped forward before he could finish. Speaking of bloodlines, she said, her voice clear and cutting, perhaps we should raise a glass to the truth, Mr. Pembroke. The room silenced. Faces turned. The string players froze mid-note. Pembroke's eyes narrowed. And you are? Eleanor Wyndham. The name dropped like a stone in still water. A gasp rolled through the crowd. Someone dropped a glass. A lady fainted. That's not possible, Pembroke growled. You died. There was a fire. There was a cover-up, Eleanor snapped. And you orchestrated it. Mr. Harrow emerged from the crowd, holding aloft the sealed will. Arthur stood beside him with a solicitor and 2 reporters in tow. This is the last will and testament of Lord Walter Wyndham, Harrow announced. And it names Eleanor as his sole heir. Pembroke's mask slipped, figuratively and literally. He tore it off and stormed toward them. You think parading parchment makes you an heiress? He hissed. Eleanor met his glare. No. But the law does. And so does the truth. Security closed in. Pembroke tried to push through the crowd, but the solicitor intercepted him. You're not leaving, Mr. Pembroke. The Crown Prosecution Service has been informed. You'll answer for what you've done. As officers emerged from the doors, Eleanor felt her breath catch. It was happening. For the first time since the fire, she stood in the house that should have been hers. Not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as a woman ready to reclaim it all. But just before Pembroke was led away, he turned back and smirked. You think this is over? He whispered. There are others. You're not the only one with blood on your hands. And with that, he vanished into the sea of flashbulbs and flashing badges. It had only been 3 days since the gala, but for Eleanor, it felt like a lifetime. The headlines screamed her name across broadsheets and tabloids alike. Heiress returns, groom jailed, Wyndham scandal exposed. She barely had a moment to breathe as her family's estate was returned to her control, the Pembroke name stripped from every legal document like wrought from marble. Yet Pembroke's final words haunted her. There are others. She sat alone in her father's study, her study now, staring at the worn leather desk and the shelves of tomes he once read to her from. Everything should have felt like victory, but unease clung to her like smoke. Arthur entered quietly, setting down a thick file. You were right to be cautious, he said. The solicitor uncovered records from the Pembroke Trust. Offshore accounts. Unregistered assets. And one more thing. He pushed a photograph toward her. Eleanor stared at it. A man. Salt and pepper hair. A chilling familiarity in the eyes. Lord Giles Norwood, Arthur said. Business partner of Pembroke. Silent investor in the Wyndham estate, before the fire. Eleanor's fingers trembled slightly as she picked up the image. The name scratched at some distant memory. A voice. A moment at a party. Her father arguing with someone in the conservatory. Then, nothing. He's been staying in Bath, Arthur continued. Out of public eye. But records show he was in London the week before your wedding. Eleanor stood. Then we find him. We finish what Pembroke started. She and Arthur traveled by train to Bath under assumed names. It was quiet when they arrived. Too quiet. The estate they were led to was surrounded by forest, almost forgotten by time. Eleanor felt the cold in her bones as soon as the gates creaked open. The housekeeper answered the door, trembling slightly when Eleanor presented her real name. She ushered them in with quick darting glances down the hall. He's unwell, she whispered. But he talks. Mostly about fire. About a girl. About guilt. Eleanor entered Lord Norwood's drawing room and found a man half draped in shadow. His eyes sunken and wary. At first, he didn't look at her. But then he saw her. And everything stopped. You're not real, he muttered. They told me you burned. I didn't, she said. But the truth almost did. Silence settled. She stepped forward. Tell me what happened. Tell me why my father died. Why Pembroke came after me. Lord Norwood reached for a decanter with trembling hands. It wasn't meant to go that far. Your father. He was going to expose something. Something big. A chain of investments tied to blackmail, to property theft, aristocrats propping each other up while ruining old families. He looked at her. Pembroke lit the match. But I let the fire burn. Eleanor's voice hardened. And you stood by while I was buried. While my inheritance was stolen. While he almost married me. Norwood's hands trembled worse. I tried to stop it. But the others, they threatened my daughter. I have letters. Evidence. I kept them. Arthur stepped forward. Where? Norwood pointed to the fireplace. A loose stone behind the grate. Arthur pried it free, revealing an iron box. Inside, letters, ledgers, and contracts. Every thread that wove the conspiracy together. But just as Eleanor opened the first letter, there was a crack, sharp and loud. A bullet tore through the window, shattering glass. She ducked, Arthur shielding her instinctively. The housekeeper screamed. Outside, a dark figure melted into the trees. Arthur shouted, "We need to leave. Now." Clutching the iron box to her chest, Eleanor fled the house, heart pounding. The truth was theirs now. But someone else knew. And they weren't done trying to bury it. The night was thick with fog as Eleanor, Arthur, and the housekeeper tore down the gravel path in Arthur's car, the iron box cradled tightly in her lap. In the distance behind them, Norwood's manor grew smaller, cloaked in darkness and danger. The shot had been no warning. It was a declaration. Someone still wanted the truth buried. They drove without stopping until they reached a discreet hotel on the edge of Wiltshire. Arthur paced the room, pressing the curtains shut, checking every window twice. Eleanor sat at the desk, pulling papers from the box one by one. Each document painted the same picture. Wyndham Industries, once a pillar of ethical trade, had been systematically gutted. Pembroke hadn't acted alone. Lord Norwood's confessions connected to an even deeper network of corruption. Names Eleanor recognized from charity events, parliamentary parties, and business circles. One in particular stood out. Mary Ann Tressel, Eleanor murmured. Arthur paused. Your mother's old friend? She visited the house the week before the fire. She said she wanted to invest. My father turned her down. Arthur frowned. She chairs the Property Restoration League. If she was part of this, it would explain how the estate transfer was so smooth. Legal strings, pulled from inside. Eleanor nodded grimly. Then we need to expose her. All of them. They didn't sleep. As dawn rose, Arthur emailed the documents to trusted journalists and solicitors. Eleanor, exhausted but determined, recorded a statement. Face bare, voice unwavering. detailing her story from the day of the fire to the bullet that nearly killed her. By midday, the internet exploded. Heiress survived estate fire. Corruption scheme revealed. Nobility network unravels. Eleanor Windsor speaks out. Eleanor's name was no longer whispered in shame. It became a rallying cry for every voice silenced by wealth and shadow. But she didn't feel victorious. Not yet. At the gala of the Property Restoration League, held that evening at a grand estate outside of London, Eleanor entered through the front doors in a dark sapphire gown. Her presence alone turned heads. Gasps. Whispers. The prodigal daughter returned. Marianne Tressel, in the center of the room, went white. "You're not invited," she said coolly. "I don't need an invitation," Eleanor replied, stepping closer. "I brought the truth." Arthur joined her, handing a printed dossier to the security detail and press waiting by the entrance. Photographers snapped furiously as Marianne's name, along with others, were listed as co-conspirators in fraud, arson, and criminal conspiracy. "You can't prove any of it," Marianne hissed. Eleanor leaned in. "We already have. And we've filed everything with the Crown Prosecution Service." The room fell into chaos. Guests surged toward exits, some shouting, others denying involvement. Security moved to detain key individuals. Marianne tried to slip away, but Eleanor was faster. "You stood by as I lost everything," she said. "You watched my family burn, and all for land. For money. You thought no one would remember." Marianne stared at her, then spat. "We built this country. You're just a child clinging to rubble." Eleanor stood taller. "Then consider me the storm that clears the rubble." The woman was taken into custody. Later that night, back at the Windsor estate, her estate, Eleanor stepped into the garden alone. The breeze was gentle, the moonlight soft. The ghosts of the past had not vanished, but their grip had loosened. Arthur joined her, carrying a glass of wine. "Are you ready to rest?" he asked. She looked out over the grounds. "No. I want to rebuild." He smiled. "Then let's begin." Together they walked forward, no longer toward vengeance, but toward healing. The wedding that wasn't had shattered more than illusions. But from those broken pieces, Eleanor had forged something stronger. Not a legacy inherited, but one she built with truth.